it doesn't rain so I can go for a walk with my dog later. Just fun stoner activities.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy 420 to all who celebrate. And of course, it's always a good day to remind everyone about the fact that cannabis is still federally illegal. Tens of thousands of people are persecuted every year because of the prohibition of cannabis and, of course, other drugs as well. And as I put on Twitter this morning, today would be a great day for President Joe Biden to legalize cannabis at the federal level and free/pardon every single nonviolent drug offender in the country, country which happens to be the most incarcerated on the planet. So, yeah, obviously, as we celebrate today, it's also important to remember all the victims of the war on drugs, and think about everyone that's still locked up for the consumption of this naturally occurring plant substance. It's total insanity, not just from a freedom perspective. I'm a libertarian when it comes to issues like drug use, but also from a medical perspective. Cannabis is a medicine. I know people that use cannabis to treat their anxiety. My own grandmother uses cannabis in order to be able to get a good night's sleep. And she wasn't able to do that until it was medically legalized in Missouri a couple years ago. So this isn't just for degenerates like myself and Zach that want to, get high as fuck and watch Harold and Kumar movies. This is a serious issue from a medical perspective, a criminal justice perspective, and obviously a liberty and freedom perspective as well. But yeah, I mean, you guys know how we roll here at the Vanguard, so this is an important issue to our hearts. But it's worth reminding everyone of.
Yeah, this is how we roll. No pun intended, Gavin. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, and it's really important. And this is one of the things I'm glad you brought it up so we could talk about it. Obviously, in the year of our Lord 2022, you don't see a lot of, in most states, right? In most states, you don't see a lot of guys that look like me and Gavin getting locked up for marijuana possession. A lot of time, like, they will make you massively hassled, right? Actually, my little brother popped his cherry, not to out him, but had his first run-in with the police, right? But you're not going to like go and get put in a box for like 18 months, right? There are horror stories of people that I know personally and also just have read about online, people who will get like 18 months, 2 years if you get caught running between Colorado and Missouri, or get caught running from Colorado to Kansas. That's fucked up and that's wrong. But the reason that we wanted to couple this, let's legalize marijuana at the federal level movement with let's not forget about the other nonviolent drug offenders that are in jail. And a lot of times they'll try and do some bullshit where they'll make you seem like you're like a violent criminal, even if what you did was maybe you like just distributed drugs and you're like, well, this is violence. And like in an abstract sense, I understand, but it's no more violent than like Purdue Pharma. And I don't see their board rotting away in a fucking cage, okay, being subjected to daily ungodly trauma like we subject our massive prison population to, both men and women. So this is really important to talk about, and it's important to remember that as we push for, Gavin and I want to be able to buy weed at the fucking grocery store now. Like that's our next, or whatever the fuck it is. We need to also be coupling that with the fact that there are people who, sold a bag of crack in the 80s and are still fucking in jail. That we have a massive war on drugs. The massive amount of war on drugs is still impacting our legal system, even though now they're choosing to enforce it at a lesser degree than they were in the 80s. One, new people are still getting swept up in the system and going to jail, which is unacceptable. And there are so many people anguishing and who have been anguishing for 40, 50 years, guys, for what I would consider and Gavin would consider nonviolent drug offenses. Like, did you shoot anybody? Did you stab anybody? Did you beat the fuck out of some guy and leave them for dead? No. Well, you're probably not a threat to society. If you were just moving some weight so that you could feed your family, you know what I mean? Or moving some weight so that you could supply your own fucking habit, right? Which you wouldn't have to do if it was properly regulated and available for you to purchase in a clean and safe fashion. And we're not saying that you should sell heroin to children or even that you should make it readily available at the fucking pharmacy. Like, you go to some countries around the world, you can buy some crazy shit at the pharmacy. Like I'm talked about my experience in Thailand and being so shocked that you could just buy like benzos behind that thing. Like, I'm not even so sure that I want you to be able to have access to like really potent and powerful drugs, just like, super easily and consumerly available. Obviously, if you're an adult, you should have the right to make that decision yourself. But I mean, for young people, just kind of like alcohol, right? You can't go in when you're 16 years old and buy a bottle of Everclear because you're not an adult. You're not going to be able to responsibly handle that, and it could result in a fucking devastating
Not
crisis.
like a lot of adults are able to responsibly handle it either. It's a freedom issue. I have mixed feelings on the age of consent as far as it comes to drugs, but it certainly shouldn't be like below 16 or something like that. You know what I mean?
I think it's pretty obvious what the science tells us on that, though.
What do you mean?
That when you're 16 years old, that your brain isn't fully formed and developed, and you know what I'm saying. I'm just saying that would make a lot more sense than our policies on drugs now, which are absolutely divorced from the science. Like, even if you listen to a guy like Dr. Carl Hart or somebody like Gabor Mate talk about drug legalization, they always do stress that no matter what, even if you are ingesting drugs during puberty stages, it's going to have a broad impact on your lively development.
Well, as someone that's twice had run-ins with the law, being a minor in possession, I would say that the charges leveled are ridiculously over the top if you're under the legal age of consent for possessing a drug or alcohol substance.
Well, that's why I said that we should not make them available for purchase like that. But I don't think that you should go to jail. I don't believe in a carceral state to begin with. But I do think that there should be barriers between purchasing something like methamphetamine when you're like 16 years old. Even if I think that barrier should be like lessened when you're an adult that's willing to make that like conscious.
You don't think meth should be available readily to all people, Zach? You're an authoritarian.
Well, I mean, I use that as an example because we give amphetamine salts to like what is it, like 1% of children nowadays in the form of Adderall. So yeah, really, I mean, that's what I mean. That's wrong too. I mean, I'm not a doctor, right? You shouldn't give people medical advice, but you know what I'm saying. It seems like there's an open prescription, and I say that as somebody.
I agree. I totally agree. Obviously, 16-year-olds shouldn't have ready access to meth and heroin. But yeah. No, it's crazy the fact that the drug laws are still as draconian as they are. I have a friend, Dante, who in fact was wrongfully imprisoned as a teenager for crossing state lines with weed in the car. It wasn't even his weed, it was his friend's. But since everyone in the car was pulled over, he got put in jail for 5, 6, 7 years, only was freed a couple of years ago thanks to the Innocence Project, but he would still be languishing in prison for a crime committed when he was a teenager. And again, it wasn't even his weed in the car. He just happened to be in the wrong car at the wrong time, and of course happened to be a black man as well. So that's the way it goes. And as I said, I myself have been arrested as a teenager for possessing cannabis twice, actually, 2-time offender. And although luckily I did not go to jail, I will say the amount of fines, the amount of money you have to pay the state for committing the crime of having weed and smoking it, it's ridiculous. I mean, over $1,000 each time. And luckily I was able to move on from that. Luckily my family was able to help me out a little bit at that time. But if I had been from a less privileged family, that would have been totally devastating. Most people can't just afford, over $1,000 in legal fees and court fees for a small level offense like that. Again, the majority of the population is living paycheck to paycheck. They can't absorb that kind of a blow, not to mention having it on your record, all of the headache that comes along with being a part of the justice system. So, or a part of the criminal legal system. So, it's not just that people are going to jail for this. Even the people that aren't going to jail that are still being punished, it's totally draconian. It's totally over the top and authoritarian, and economically devastating to the poorest among us. As I always say, it's not illegal to the rich people if the crime is a fine or if the punishment is a fine. So only if you're poor is that really going to matter, and that's who it affects primarily.
Yeah, and that's why they keep it. That's the only reason, guys, why they don't want marijuana to be legalized federally, right? It's this. Well, one, there's the big pharma lobby against it, but also the ability to just freely pull people over because the suspected smell of marijuana, and yes, it's decriminalized here, but it's still against the law, so we can still pull you over and then we can hassle you about whatever we want. I mean, it's like a modern day stop and frisk kind of a loophole for the cops where they always have an excuse, and it's a smell normally, right? And they'll just say, I smelled weed emanating from the vehicle. We were driving down the highway, but somehow I smelled weed protruding from their vehicle with all of our windows. But that's what happens. And you know how cops work. They'll be like, yep, we all smelled the fucking weed when we got there. Yeah, must have been smoking in it yesterday because we didn't find any. You know, those kinds of deals. So that's why that's one of the other main reasons. So it's like Big Pharma, the Purdue Pharmas, the disgusting fuckers that want to keep people on opiates and synthetic opiates instead of having access to natural, far less expensive treatment. In fact, treatment that they could and far less than the cost of their current treatments actually grow themselves, produce themselves, etc. Completely cut out the capitalist structure of Big Pharma for a lot of individuals. So that's one side of it, but it's also this idea of like maintaining control over people and being able to prey on you know, most typically African American and brown.
Yeah, that's why it was made illegal in the first place, to crack down on the hippies and the black people in the 60s and stuff. So yeah, no, it's total insanity. Anyway, again, happy 420, everyone. Hope that everyone gets to celebrate a bit today, smoke some dank weed. And thank you, Jenna, by the way, for the $4.99. This was the closest amount I could get to 420. Happy holidays to my fellow Midwestern buds. Hey, that's a true comrade. Thank you so much, Jenna, for the donation and the kind words. Happy holidays. Right back at you.
Yeah, take care, and we will be celebrating 420 very hard, as we hope you are as well.
Right, and also just as one more point I wanted to make on the topic of 420. I saw a couple of the progressives in Congress, the squad members, tweeting about how we should legalize cannabis, and, you know, tweeting at Joe Biden, we should legalize cannabis, today's 420, et cetera, et cetera. But wouldn't it be nice if we actually had, you know, a serious left flank resistance in Congress organizing, say, a protest on the lawn of the White House for 420? I mean, this is a serious issue, guys. And it just bothers me how little urgency a lot of these squad members and progressive lawmakers tend to bring to it. You know, this was something that Bernie would talk about on the campaign trail. We need to legalize cannabis. But again, now that Joe Biden's in office, it seems like everyone just is throwing up their hands, tail between their legs, going on home without putting up a serious fight. Like, think about all the people that are in prison right now for cannabis. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C. and in other major cities, people are making millions and millions of dollars selling weed. You know what I'm saying? This is absolute insanity. And is it not worth raising a ruckus on behalf of those imprisoned, incarcerated drug offenders that did absolutely nothing wrong but had their lives ruined as a result of this insane government overreach and authoritarianism? Like, how is this not an issue that we're constantly making a ruckus about? You know, it just bothers me that, again, I mean, tweeting is better than nothing, but it still is clearly not being very effective. There should be a massive pressure campaign spearheaded by the squad members and everyone that pretends to consider themselves progressive in order to, you know, make Joe Biden legalize cannabis, take it off the Schedule 1. He has the power to do so unilaterally through executive order. He could do it today. He could have done it yesterday. He could do it tomorrow. Why are we not pressuring him to do this?
Yeah, I think it just shows an insincerity of and an unwillingness to actually meaningfully push Biden left. If there was one unifying cause, I mean, what, like 66% was the most recent, because everybody was making fun of him. It's actually twice as popular as Joe Biden himself to legalize weed, right? So it's an easy layup, right? It's actually a slam dunk because people would be super happy about it, and he would buy the news cycle for like at least a week, and then people like us would be talking about it like permanently. We'd be like, well, Joe Biden was a sleazy fuck and we hate him, but at least he did this one good thing that one time. You know what I mean? And so, you know, and that's better than you're ever going to get if you don't do anything else. And I think the fact that the squad doesn't just say, hey, why don't we reach out to every single congressperson that just voted in the House, you know, every single member of the House of Representatives that just voted to legalize weed, which they did a few weeks ago. It passed in the House, but it's dead on arrival in the Senate, so nobody even bothered to cover it. Everybody that voted for that should show up right outside the White House holding a sign that says POTUS, sign the paper, or like, you know, legalize free the weed, legalize it, whatever. They're all old people, so I don't remember what the slogans were back in the day. But, you know, that would mean something. And then you would have a bunch of motherfuckers get on buses, you know, from all around, and we would all show up and stand with them, and they would all give speeches. And then you could have some people who'd been incarcerated speak. You could have some activists speak. You could get the guys from High Times to show up, you know, all these longtime weed guys. Tommy Chong would show up probably if it was a big enough deal. That's how you start to really get POTUS's attention. And then he looks like a real piece of shit right in his own backyard because he He's not going to do it. Like, he's not, oh, this is something that we could do. Get some, you know what? If you're trying to reach Joe Biden, I think it might even be tactically smart. Get some fucking Republicans up there to speak. Be like, look, Joe, reach across the aisle. Get this done. This is bipartisan. You always talk about bipartisan. You're fucking in love with that word. Throw it back at him. Make it tough for him to not do this. They have the absolute ability to do that. And the fact that they're not is, again, just another example of the fact that this is unserious. It's unserious. They don't care about weed legalization unless it falls in their lap. And that's the way that it is about basically everything with the squad. They're no longer interested in crusading. They're interested in vote casting. And that's a massive problem when you've only been in office the longest person, like 3.5 years max. AOC's got in 2019 technically, so like 3.5 years. Anyway, I think it's disappointing.
Yeah, and thanks for the $2, Mike. Biden never will do it. He wrote the crime bill. That is 100%, unfortunately, probably correct. Not that we shouldn't be pressuring him, but yeah, I mean, clearly this guy's an old school drug warrior, and to now legalize cannabis would kind of almost be admitting that the crime bill was, incorrect, that it, resulted in the incarceration of people that, by his own admission, would should have been doing something that was legal. If he were to legalize weed, it would be to imply that. So yeah, you're not wrong, Mike, and that is very worth pointing out.
Yeah, it's it would require too much introspection and growth and a conscience and all those things that you can't have if you're going to become president, apparently.
Yeah, absolutely. Something else